The crimson warning lights of Bastion Station cast eerie shadows across Jeger's weathered face as he stood before the massive viewport, watching the last civilian transport disappear into the void. Behind him, the station's command center buzzed with desperate activity, officers and technicians working frantically to prepare their final defenses. The War of Isolation had raged for 3 years, and humanity had been pushed back to this single outpost at the edge of known space. Ross traced the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a memento from his first encounter with the Sovereignty Collective's flagship, SC Aurora. That battle had cost him half his squadron and earned him the nickname Jeger, the Hunter, for his relentless pursuit of the enemy despite overwhelming odds. Now, as the station's chief tactical officer, he found himself preparing for what would likely be humanity's final stand. "Jeger, you need to see this," called Keelan Voss from across the command center. The station commander's voice carried a weight that made Ross' stomach tighten. Voss had been his mentor since the early days of the war, a brilliant strategist who had somehow kept their ragtag fleet together through impossible circumstances. If something had shaken Voss, it was serious. Ross approached the central holographic display where Voss stood alongside Dr. Nira Castellan, the station's chief scientist. The hologram showed a three-dimensional map of the surrounding star system, with dozens of red dots converging on their position. At the center of the enemy formation was a massive signature that pulsed with an ominous energy. "SC Aurora has arrived," Nira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not alone. Long-range sensors are detecting at least 40 escort vessels, including 6 dreadnoughts. They'll be within weapons range in 18 hours. Ross felt his blood run cold. SC Aurora was more than just a ship, it was the Sovereignty Collective's ultimate weapon, a massive vessel commanded by Admiral Thane Karath, the architect of humanity's isolation. 3 years ago, Karath had convinced the Galactic Council that humans were too aggressive and unpredictable to be allowed free movement through space. The resulting quarantine had cut Earth and its colonies off from vital trade routes and resources, slowly strangling human civilization. "What's our defensive capability?" Ross asked, though he already suspected the answer. Voss's expression was grim. 12 corvettes, 8 frigates, and the station's fixed defenses. Maybe 1,000 souls total. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "Ross, they're not here for another skirmish. This is an extermination fleet." The command center fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Ross watched the red dots on the display creep closer, each one representing enough firepower to level a city. He thought of the billions of humans scattered across their isolated worlds, cut off from hope, slowly dying as their resources dwindled. Bastion Station was more than humanity's last military outpost, it was their last symbol of defiance. "There has to be something we can do," Ross said, his voice carrying the same determination that had earned him his reputation. "Some weakness we can exploit." Nira stepped forward, her eyes bright with desperate inspiration. "Actually, there might be. I've been studying the energy signatures from SC Aurora's previous battles. The ship's main weapon, the Collective calls it the Silence Cannon, it draws massive amounts of power from their fusion cores. For a brief moment during the charging sequence, their shields drop to redirect energy." "How brief?" Voss asked. 12 seconds. Maybe 15 at most. Ross stared at the hologram, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. 12 seconds against the most heavily defended ship in the galaxy, protected by an entire fleet. It was suicide, but it was also the only chance they had. He thought of Yerrick Solmir, his best friend and wingman, who had died holding off a collective assault so civilian ships could escape. Yerrick would have called it a glorious impossibility, exactly the kind of odds that made life worth fighting for. "We'll need a distraction," Ross said slowly. "Something big enough to draw their attention while a small strike force gets close to Aurora." Zephyr Blackthorn, the station's best pilot, looked up from her console. "You're talking about a kamikaze run. One ship, maximum stealth, slipped through their lines during the chaos." Ross nodded, meeting her gaze. "One ship, one chance. But it has to be done perfectly. As if summoned by their conversation, the long-range communications array crackled to life. Admiral Karatha's voice filled the command center, cold and implacable. "Bastion Station, this is Admiral Thane Karatha of the Sovereignty Collective. You have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally. Comply, and your personnel will be granted swift execution. Resist, and I will ensure your deaths are educational for other human settlements." The transmission ended, leaving behind only the sound of their own breathing. Roz looked around at his fellow officers, people who had become family during these dark years. They had all lost so much already, but none of them showed fear. Only grim determination. "Well," Voss said with dark humor, "I suppose that settles it. Jeger, start working on that strike plan. The rest of us have a last stand to prepare." As the command staff dispersed to their duties, Roz remained at the viewport, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, SC Aurora was approaching like a herald of humanity's extinction. But Roz Jeger had never been one to accept defeat quietly. The hunter would have his prey, one way or another. The next 8 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Roz worked alongside Nira in the station's engineering bay, modifying a sleek reconnaissance vessel called the Shadowhawk for what would likely be its final mission. The ship was humanity's most advanced stealth fighter, equipped with experimental cloaking technology that had been their one advantage in the war's early days. "The modifications are risky," Nira explained as she installed additional shield generators. "I'm rerouting power from life support and non-essential systems to boost the cloak's effectiveness. You'll have maybe 40 minutes of air once you engage full stealth, and that's if everything works perfectly." Roz nodded, running his hands along the ship's sleek hull. The Shadowhawk had been Jarek's bird originally, painted with kill markings from a dozen successful missions. Roz could almost hear his friend's voice in the hangar's echoes, joking about impossible odds and glorious deaths. 40 minutes is more than enough. I'll either succeed or be space dust long before then." Zephyr appeared at his shoulder, her expression unreadable. "You know I should be the one flying this mission. I'm the better pilot." "Maybe," Roz conceded, "but this isn't about flying skill. It's about knowing SC Aurora's weaknesses. I've studied that ship for 3 years, Zeph. I know how Karatha thinks, how he deploys his defenses. You're needed here anyway." Voss will want his best pilot coordinating the defensive screen. Before Zephyr could argue further, Keelan Voss entered the hangar accompanied by a man Roz didn't recognize. The stranger was tall and thin, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time in deep space. His uniform bore the insignia of a freelance trader, but his eyes held the hardness of a veteran soldier. "Roz, I want you to meet Captain Marcus Aldwin," Voss said. "He arrived 6 hours ago with a cargo run from the Outer Rim. When he heard about our situation, he volunteered to help." Aldwin stepped forward, extending a calloused hand. "Commander Jeger, I've heard about your reputation. I also heard you might need a distraction for your strike run." Roz shook the offered hand, studying the trader's face. "What did you have in mind?" "My ship, the Free Spirit, is loaded with industrial mining charges, enough to level a small moon. I was planning to deliver them to the Kepler colony before." Aldwin gestured vaguely toward the stars. "Well, before this all started. Point is, I can create one hell of a fireworks show." The implications hit Roz immediately. A merchant vessel approaching SC Aurora's fleet would draw attention, especially if it appeared to be making a desperate ramming attack. The explosion would provide the perfect cover for the Shadowhawk to slip through their lines undetected. "That's suicide," Roz said quietly. Aldwin's smile was grim but genuine. "Son, I've been running supplies to human colonies for 30 years. I've watched the collective slowly strangle everything I've worked to build. If my death can give you a shot at that bastard Karatha, it's a good trade." Over the following hours, they refined their desperate plan. Aldwin would approach the enemy fleet openly, broadcasting a surrender message while secretly arming his cargo. When SC Aurora began charging its silence cannon to make an example of the merchant ship, Aldwin would detonate his cargo, creating a massive explosion and electromagnetic pulse. In the confusion, Roz would use the Shadowhawk stealth systems to penetrate Aurora's defenses and strike at the brief vulnerability in their shields. As the plan took shape, Roz found himself in the station's observation lounge, sharing what might be his last meal with the command staff. The room overlooked the hangar where both ships were being prepared, and Roz could see engineers working frantically to arm Aldwin's vessel while making final adjustments to the Shadowhawk. "You know, Jeger," Voss said, raising a cup of synthetic coffee in mock salute, "when this all started, I never imagined it would end with two madmen charging the biggest ship in the galaxy." Dr. Nira looked up from her data pad, where she had been reviewing the technical specifications one final time. "The calculations are solid. If you can hit Aurora's primary power coupling during the vulnerability window, the resulting cascade failure should cripple their main weapon systems. Maybe even destroy the ship entirely." "And if I miss?" Roz asked. Nira's expression was somber. "Then the explosion will be visible from Earth." Zephyr set down her cup with more force than necessary. "There has to be another way. Some option we haven't considered." "There isn't," Roz said with quiet finality. "We've run every simulation, explored every tactical possibility. This is our one shot." The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the communications array. On the main display, Admiral Karatha's angular face appeared, his expression carved from ice. Behind him, Roz could see the bridge of SC Aurora, a vast chamber filled with exotic technology and alien advisors from various collective species. "Humans of Bastion Station," Karath began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "Your time grows short. I offer you one final opportunity to surrender. Think of your families, your children. Is your pride worth their suffering?" Voss stood slowly, his weathered face set in lines of absolute defiance. "Admiral Karath, this is Commander Keelan Voss. I have a message from humanity for you and your collective masters." Karath leaned forward slightly, perhaps expecting a plea for mercy. "We're not surrendering," Voss said simply. "And we're not going quietly. Whatever happens here, remember that humans don't kneel." For a moment, something like surprise flickered across Karatha's features. Then his expression hardened into cold fury. "So be it. In 6 hours, Bastion Station will be silent, and your species will learn the price of defiance. I will make your deaths a lesson that echoes across the galaxy." The transmission ended, leaving them in heavy silence. Roz stood and moved to the viewport, watching as the distant stars began to shift and blur. SC Aurora's fleet was dropping out of hyperspace, their massive forms blotting out sections of the star field. Even at this distance, the flagship was an impressive sight, a kilometer-long vessel bristling with weapons and surrounded by a protective swarm of escort ships. "Beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way," Aldwin commented, joining Roz at the viewport. "I've never seen anything that big moving through space." Roz nodded, memorizing every detail of the approaching fleet. Somewhere among those ships was his target, the weakness that might save humanity or at least ensure they died fighting. He thought of Yarok again, of all the friends and comrades lost in this war. They deserved better than extinction, better than being forgotten in the vast darkness between stars. 6 hours, Roz murmured. Enough time for one last miracle. As if responding to his words, the first enemy vessels began to separate from the main fleet, moving to establish a siege perimeter around Bastion Station. The final act of humanity's war of isolation was about to begin. The enemy fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of mechanical locusts, their hulls gleaming with the cold light of distant stars. Roz stood in the command center, watching the tactical display as dozens of red contacts spread across the holographic map. At the center of the formation, SC Aurora hung in space like a metallic predator, its massive form dwarfing even the largest escort vessels. "Mother of Stars," Zephyr whispered from her position at the sensor array. "The energy readings coming off that thing, it's like staring into a miniature sun." Admiral Karath wasted no time in establishing his dominance. Within minutes of arrival, his fleet had formed a perfect sphere around Bastion Station, cutting off any possible escape routes. The precision of the maneuver spoke to the collective's military efficiency. Every ship knew its position, every captain understood their role in humanity's final execution. Mira looked up from her instruments, her face pale. "Roz, you need to see this. I'm detecting massive energy buildups across the enemy fleet. Whatever they're planning, it's bigger than just destroying the station." Roz moved to her console, studying the readings. The data was disturbing. Each of the 6 dreadnoughts was charging what appeared to be planet-killer weapons, while SC Aurora's own power core was cycling through an unfamiliar sequence. This wasn't just an attack on Bastion Station, it was preparation for something far more sinister. "Commander Voss," Roz called out, his voice carrying a new urgency. "We need to accelerate our timeline. They're not just here to destroy us, they're preparing for something else." Before Voss could respond, the communications array crackled to life again. This time, Karatha's image was accompanied by a star chart showing the human sectors of space. Red targeting markers appeared over every human colony, every outpost, every ship. "People of Bastion Station," Karatha announced with cold satisfaction, "you are about to witness the final solution to the human problem. My fleet carries enough firepower to sterilize every world in your pathetic territory. When your station falls, we will systematically visit each of your colonies and ensure that no trace of your species survives." The holographic display shifted to show images of human settlements, children playing in colony domes, farmers working in hydroponic gardens, families gathered around dinner tables. Each image was marked with a countdown timer showing when the extermination fleet would arrive. "Earth has 48 hours, Korath continued. "The outer colonies, less. You have chosen defiance, and now your entire species will pay the price. But first, you will watch your last hope die." As if to emphasize his point, SC Aurora's main weapon began to glow with an ominous purple light. The silence cannon was charging, its energy signature building to devastating levels. Roz realized with cold certainty that Korath intended to use Bastion Station's destruction as a demonstration for the rest of humanity, a final psychological blow before the systematic genocide began. "How long until they're in firing position?" Voss asked, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "For hours, maybe 5, Zephyr replied from her console. "But Commander, the weapon's energy signature is unlike anything we've recorded before. If they fire that thing at full power, the explosion will be visible from the next star system," Roz finished. "Korath wants to make sure every human settlement sees their last hope die." The command center fell into grim silence as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about Bastion Station anymore, it was about preventing the complete extinction of the human race. The weight of that responsibility settled on Roz's shoulders like a physical burden. Captain Aldwin's voice cut through the tension from the hangar bay. "Commander Jeger, the Free Spirit is armed and ready. I've rigged the mining charges for maximum electromagnetic pulse. When I detonate, it should blind their sensors for at least 30 seconds. "And the Shadowhawk?" Roz asked. "Final systems check complete," Nira reported. "The stealth modifications are holding steady, and I've programmed the navigation computer with Aurora's most likely defensive patterns. The torpedo bay is loaded with our most powerful warheads, if you can get close enough to that power coupling." Roz nodded, moving toward the hangar bay. The time for planning was over, now came the most difficult part of any mission, the waiting. As he walked through the station's corridors, he passed crew members making their own preparations. Some were writing letters they would never send, others were simply sitting in quiet contemplation. All of them knew what was coming. In the hangar, the Shadowhawk waited like a sleeping predator. Its dark hull absorbed the bay's lighting, making it seem to fade into the shadows even without its cloaking system engaged. Roz ran his hand along the ship's nose, where Yarok had painted a small hunting bird with spread wings, their squadron's old insignia. "Looks like it's up to us, old friend," Roz murmured to the empty air. He began his pre-flight checks, each familiar ritual helping to calm his nerves. The ship's systems hummed to life under his touch, responding like a well-trained warhorse to its rider. Roz had flown dozens of missions in various craft, but the Shadowhawk felt different, more personal, more alive. As he worked, other members of the command staff filtered into the hangar. Voss came to offer a final handshake and a few words of encouragement. Zephyr hugged him briefly, whispering something about coming back alive that they both knew was impossible. Even Dr. Nira appeared, carrying a small data pad. Last-minute modifications to the targeting system, she explained, uploading the data to the Shadowhawk's computer. I've managed to enhance the ship's sensors to better detect Aurora's power fluctuations. It might give you an extra second or two of warning when the vulnerability window opens. Every second would count in the desperate race ahead. Roz accepted the upgrade gratefully, then climbed into the cockpit and began the final startup sequence. Around him, the hangar came alive with activity as ground crews made their last preparations. Through the bay's atmospheric barrier, Roz could see the enemy fleet drawing closer. SC Aurora dominated the view now, its massive form bristling with weapons and defensive systems. Somewhere aboard that ship, Admiral Karath was probably watching Bastion Station through his own viewports, savoring the approaching victory. All stations, this is Commander Voss, came the announcement over the station's internal communications. Enemy fleet will be in firing position in 2 hours. All defensive units, prepare for final engagement. This is our line in the sand, people. Whatever happens here, we make it count. Ross completed his pre-flight checks and settled back in the pilot's seat, closing his eyes for a moment of meditation. He thought of Earth, of the billions of people who would never know how close they had come to extinction. He thought of the human colonies scattered across space, their populations unaware that their fate hung in the balance of the next few hours. Most of all, he thought of Yarrick Solmir, whose sacrifice had given them this one desperate chance. The hunter was ready for his final pursuit. When Roz opened his eyes, SC Aurora filled his entire field of view, its hull plating reflecting the light of nearby stars. The countdown had begun, and humanity's last hope was about to take flight. The Shadowhawk slipped from Bastion Station's hangar bay like a ghost, its cloaking systems engaged and hull temperature rapidly cooling to match the background radiation of space. Roz felt the familiar sensation of microgravity as the ship's inertial dampeners adjusted to free flight, carrying him away from humanity's last sanctuary and toward the most dangerous mission of his life. Shadowhawk, this is Control, came Voss's voice through the encrypted communication channel. You are clear of the station and running dark. Telemetry shows clean separation. Acknowledged, Control, Roz replied, his hands moving across the control panels with practiced precision. Beginning approach vector to target zone. Free Spirit, what's your status? Captain Aldwin's voice crackled through the comm system from his position several thousand kilometers away. Free Spirit is in position and holding. Cargo is armed and ready for the big show. Just give me the word, Commander. Through the Shadowhawk's enhanced sensors, Roz could see the enemy fleet in perfect detail. The collective ships moved with mechanical precision, their formations beautiful and terrible in their ordered symmetry. Escort vessels held perfect spacing around the larger capital ships, while fighter squadrons patrolled the perimeter in sweeping arcs. At the center of it all, SC Aurora hung like a metal moon, its weapon systems slowly tracking toward Bastion Station. Roz, came Nira's voice over a private channel, I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from Aurora's main weapon. Karath is preparing to fire. Roz checked his chronometer. They were still 30 minutes ahead of schedule, but apparently the Admiral was eager to begin his demonstration. The purple glow emanating from SC Aurora's forward sections was growing brighter, casting an eerie light across the surrounding escort ships. All units, be advised, Voss announced over the command frequency. Enemy flagship is charging main weapon ahead of schedule. Defensive batteries, prepare to engage at maximum range. Roz watched as Bastion Station's weapon turrets swiveled toward the approaching threat. The station's guns were formidable, but they were designed for defense against raiders and small fleets, not a vessel the size of SC Aurora. Still, the gunners would give Karath something to think about in humanity's final moments. The first exchange of fire lit up space like a deadly aurora. Aurora's escort ships opened up with long-range bombardment, their particle beams and plasma cannons reaching across the void to hammer the station's shields. Bastion Station replied with everything it had, sending streams of accelerated matter and energy weapons toward the enemy fleet. Defensive screen is holding, reported Zephyr from her position in the station's command center. But those dreadnoughts haven't even started shooting yet. When they do. Roz didn't need her to finish the sentence. He could see the 6 massive capital ships positioning themselves for a coordinated bombardment. Each dreadnought carried enough firepower to level a continent, and together they would turn Bastion Station into expanding plasma before SC Aurora even needed to fire its main weapon. "Aldwin, it's time," Roz said into his communicator. "Make your approach as obvious as possible. I need every eye on you." "Copy that, Commander." "Free Spirit beginning attack run." "It's been an honor serving with you all." Roz watched as the merchant vessel dropped its concealment and began accelerating toward the enemy fleet. Aldwin had modified his ship's transponder to broadcast the surrender signal while simultaneously arming his cargo hold full of mining charges. To the collective sensors, it would appear that a desperate human trader was attempting to ram their flagship in a futile gesture of defiance. The reaction was immediate. Escort ships began turning to intercept the Free Spirit, their commanders probably amused by the pathetic attempt. Roz could imagine Karatha's reaction aboard SC Aurora. The Admiral would likely see this as the perfect opportunity to demonstrate his weapon's power before dealing with Bastion Station. "All escort vessels, hold your fire," came Karatha's voice over the open communications channel. "I want that ship intact. We'll use it for target practice." Roz felt his blood run cold. If the escort ships captured Aldwin before he could detonate his cargo, their entire plan would collapse. The Free Spirit was still several minutes away from effective detonation range, and the collective interceptors were closing fast. "Aldwin, you've got company," Roz warned over the comm. "I see them," came the reply, remarkably calm for a man flying toward certain death. "Don't worry, Commander. I've got a few tricks left." The Free Spirit suddenly erupted with defensive fire, its cargo bay doors opening to reveal improvised weapons turrets. Aldwin had spent his final hours turning his merchant vessel into a makeshift gunship, and now he was using every trick learned from 30 years of dangerous cargo runs. His ship wove between the interceptors like a thing alive, return fire sparking off improvised armor plating. "Magnificent," Voss whispered over the command channel. "That crazy traitor is actually holding them off." But Roz could see what the others couldn't. The Free Spirit's hull was taking massive damage, her improvised weapons failing one by one. Aldwin was bleeding atmosphere and losing power, but still he pressed forward toward his target. The man was buying them time with his life, every second purchased with pain and determination. "Roz, you need to move now," Mira's voice cut through the comm static. "Aurora's weapon charge is at 60% and climbing. The vulnerability window is approaching fast." Roz pushed the Shadowhawk's engines to maximum silent running, using the battle's chaos to mask his approach. The stealth ship slipped between the massive hulls of enemy vessels, its cloaking system bending light and sensor waves around its hull. To any watching screens, the space around SC Aurora appeared empty. Through his cockpit, Roz could see the flagship growing larger with each passing second. The ship was even more massive than he had imagined, its hull stretching away in all directions like a small city. Weapon emplacements bristled from every surface, while shield generators hummed with barely contained energy. Finding the specific power coupling that Nira had identified would be like locating a single rivet on a skyscraper. "Free Spirit to all units," came Aldwin's voice, now strained with pain and effort. "Beginning final approach. Tell my family, tell them I remembered how to fly." Roz watched in horror and admiration as the damaged merchant vessel broke through the last line of interceptors, its hull glowing cherry red from atmospheric breaches and weapons fire. Somehow, impossibly, Aldwin had managed to reach effective range of SC Aurora. "Aurora's main weapon at 80% charge," Nira reported urgently. "The power coupling should be exposed in approximately 90 seconds. The moment stretched like eternity. Roz could see Aldwin's ship beginning its final approach toward SC Aurora's massive hull, mining charges armed and ready for detonation. The Shadowhawk was perfectly positioned, its torpedo tubes loaded and targeting systems locked onto the area where the power coupling should appear. "This is for every human who ever looked up at the stars and dared to dream," Aldwin said quietly over the comm. Then, with a flash that outshone nearby suns, the Free Spirit and her cargo of mining charges detonated against SC Aurora's forward shields. The electromagnetic pulse that followed was beyond anything Roz had ever experienced. Even through the Shadowhawk shielding, his instruments went dark for precious seconds. When they flickered back online, he could see chaos throughout the enemy fleet as ships struggled to restore their sensors and communications. And there, exactly where Nira had predicted, a section of SC Aurora's hull was glowing with exposed conduits and power relays. The vulnerability window had opened, and Roz Jeger, the hunter, was ready to strike. The electromagnetic pulse from Aldwin's sacrifice had turned the ordered collective fleet into a chaos of blind ships and screaming communications. Roz watched as instruments flicker back online as the Shadowhawk emerged from the pulse's effects, its hardened systems recovering faster than the enemy vessels around him. Through the expanding cloud of debris that had once been the Free Spirit, he could see his target clearly. SC Aurora's forward hull section pulsed with exposed energy conduits, their protective covering retracted to channel power to the silence cannon. The vulnerability window was open, but Roz could see it beginning to close already as automated systems worked to restore the ship's defenses. He had perhaps 10 seconds before the opportunity vanished forever. "Target acquired," Roz announced over the comm, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Beginning attack run." The Shadowhawk accelerated toward its massive target, its torpedo tubes primed and targeting computer locked onto the precise coordinates Nira had provided. Around him, collective ships were beginning to restore their sensor systems, their crews undoubtedly confused by the sudden appearance of a human fighter in their midst. "Roz, you're running out of time," came Nira's urgent voice through the static-filled communication channel. "Power coupling exposure at 70% and falling. 8 seconds to full closure." Roz pushed the Shadowhawk's engines beyond their rated limits, feeling the ship shudder under the stress. The torpedo firing solution turned green on his display, and he could see the exact point where his weapons needed to strike. The power coupling was barely visible among the maze of conduits and hull plating, a target no larger than a building on a ship the size of a small city. 5 seconds, Nira called out. Roz's finger hovered over the firing control, waiting for the perfect moment. Through his cockpit, he could see individual details on SC Aurora's hull, observation windows, sensor arrays, weapons turrets beginning to track toward his position. Somewhere behind that armor plating, Admiral Karath was probably screaming orders at his bridge crew. 3 seconds. The Shadowhawk's targeting system achieved perfect lock. Roz could feel Jarek's presence beside him, his old friend's voice whispering encouragement across the years. Every human who had ever died in this war was watching, waiting for this single moment that could change everything. "Now!" Nira shouted. Roz fired. 4 quantum torpedoes streaked across the remaining distance, their warheads glowing like miniature stars. Each torpedo carried enough destructive power to vaporize a city block, and they were aimed at the most vulnerable point on the galaxy's most powerful warship. Time seemed to slow as Roz watched the weapons close the final distance to their target. The first torpedo struck the power coupling directly, its warhead detonating in a burst of pure energy. The second and third torpedoes followed microseconds later, their explosions tearing through the weakened hull plating and into SC Aurora's vital systems. The fourth torpedo penetrated deepest of all, its detonation triggering a cascade failure that spread through the ship's primary power grid. "Direct hit." Zephyr's voice erupted over the comm from Bastion Station. "Roz, you beautiful madman, you actually did it." But Roz could see that his victory was incomplete. While his attack had severely damaged SC Aurora's main weapon, the massive ship was still functional. Emergency lighting flickered along its hull as damage control teams worked frantically to restore power. The silence cannon was offline, but the ship's secondary weapons were already swiveling toward the Shadowhawk's position. "All units, Aurora is wounded but not dead," Roz announced over the command channel. "Repeat, target is damaged but still operational." The enemy fleet was recovering from Aldwin's electromagnetic pulse, their sensors coming back online to reveal the human fighter that had somehow penetrated their defenses. Dozens of weapons began tracking toward the Shadowhawk, and Roz knew his ship's stealth capabilities were useless at this range. "Roz, get out of there," Voss ordered from the command center. "You've done enough. Come home." But Roz could see something the others couldn't. His attack had done more than disable the silence cannon, it had triggered a chain reaction in SC Aurora's power systems. Energy readings across the ship's hull were fluctuating wildly, and he could see secondary explosions beginning to ripple through the forward sections. "Negative, Control," Roz replied, turning the Shadowhawk toward SC Aurora's main hangar bay. "The ship is destabilizing. I'm going to finish this." "Jeger, that's suicide," Nira's voice crackled through the comm. "The power fluctuations you're seeing, that ship is going to explode whether you do anything or not." "Maybe," Roz acknowledged, pushing his engines to emergency power. "But I'm not leaving anything to chance." The Shadowhawk screamed toward SC Aurora's hangar bay, its hull glowing from atmospheric friction as it penetrated the ship's artificial atmosphere. Behind him, Roz could hear multiple collective voices shouting over the radio as they realized what he intended to do. Some were trying to seal the hangar bay, others were calling for immediate evacuation. Through the chaos, one voice cut through with icy authority. "All units, target that fighter. Do not let it reach the reactor core." Admiral Karoth had finally spoken, and Roz could hear the fury and desperation in the man's voice. The architect of humanity's isolation was watching his ultimate weapon dying around him, and he knew exactly what Roz intended to do. The Shadowhawk burst through the hangar bay's energy barriers and into the ship's cavernous interior. The bay was enormous, filled with collective fighters and support craft, but Roz ignored them all. His target was deeper in the ship, at the very heart of SC Aurora's power systems. "Computer, display fastest route to main reactor," Roz commanded. The ship's navigation system highlighted a path through the massive vessel's corridors and maintenance shafts. It was a maze of passages barely wide enough for the Shadowhawk, but it would take him directly to Aurora's core. Roz engaged the ship's maneuvering thrusters and dove into the mechanical labyrinth. Behind him, emergency bulkheads were sealing, trying to contain the damage from his entry. Ahead, security systems were coming online, filling the corridors with defensive fire. The Shadowhawk twisted and rolled through the passages, its pilot pushing both ship and himself beyond their limits. "Roz," came Voss's voice, faint through the interference, "the entire enemy fleet is converging on Aurora. Whatever you're going to do it fast." Through the ship's sensors, Roz could feel the massive vessel shuddering around him. His initial attack had triggered a cascade failure that was spreading through Aurora's systems, but the ship's damage control teams were fighting to contain it. If they succeeded, the collective would still have their ultimate weapon, and humanity's genocide would proceed as planned. The Shadowhawk burst into SC Aurora's main reactor chamber, a vast space filled with fusion cores and power conduits. At the center of it all, a massive antimatter containment unit pulsed with barely controlled energy. Roz could see collective engineers working desperately to stabilize the systems, their movements becoming frantic as they noticed his arrival. "This is for Yerrick," Roz whispered, arming the Shadowhawk's remaining weapons. "And for every human who ever dared to reach for the stars." He fired everything he had directly into the antimatter containment unit. The explosion began as a pinprick of absolute light at the heart of SC Aurora's reactor core, then expanded outward with the force of a collapsing star. Roz had perhaps a millisecond to register the success of his attack before the antimatter detonation consumed everything around him. The Shadowhawk, the reactor chamber, and several decks of the massive flagship simply ceased to exist in an eruption of pure energy. From Bastion Station, Keelan Voss watched through the command center's main viewport as SC Aurora died. The explosion started deep within the ship's hull, then burst outward in a cascade of secondary detonations that tore the kilometer-long vessel apart. Bulkheads ruptured, weapon systems exploded, and the ship's artificial gravity failed, sending debris spinning out in all directions. "By all the stars," Zephyr whispered from her console. "He actually did it. Roz actually killed that monster." But Voss's expression remained grim as he studied the tactical display. While SC Aurora was dying in spectacular fashion, the rest of Karatha's fleet remained intact. 6 dreadnoughts, dozens of escort vessels, and hundreds of fighters still surrounded Bastion Station. The death of their flagship had bought humanity time, but the genocide fleet was still operational. All stations, maintain defensive positions, Voss ordered over the ship's communications. Aurora is finished, but we still have a fleet to deal with. On the tactical display, the collective ships were pulling back from the expanding debris field, their formations reforming with mechanical precision. Whatever shock they felt at losing their ultimate weapon, it wasn't affecting their tactical discipline. Within minutes, the 6 dreadnoughts had established a new firing line, their planet-killer weapons beginning to charge. Dr. Nira looked up from her sensor readings, her face pale with exhaustion and grief. "Commander, I'm detecting massive energy buildups from the dreadnoughts. They're preparing to fire in unison." Voss nodded grimly. Without SC Aurora's silence cannon, the collective had reverted to brute force tactics. 6 dreadnought weapons firing simultaneously would be more than enough to vaporize Bastion Station and everyone aboard it. Ra's sacrifice had eliminated Karatha's demonstration weapon, but it hadn't stopped the fleet's mission. "Time to firing?" Voss asked. 18 minutes, Zephyr replied. "Their weapons take longer to charge than Aurora's cannon, but the result will be the same." As if summoned by their conversation, the communications array crackled to life. The image that appeared was not Admiral Karath, but rather a younger collective officer with the insignia of a fleet commander. His expression was cold with professional anger. "Bastion Station, this is Admiral Janus Keleth, assuming command of the collective fleet. Admiral Karath died with his ship, but our mission remains unchanged. You have 17 minutes to surrender unconditionally, or my dreadnoughts will reduce your station to constituent atoms." Voss studied the new commander's face, seeing none of Karatha's theatrical cruelty, only efficient determination. In some ways, this made Keleth more dangerous. He would complete the genocide not out of hatred, but simply because it was his assigned task. "Admiral Keleth," Voss replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "This is Commander Keelan Voss. I want you to understand something very clearly. We are not surrendering. Ras Jeger just proved that your ships can be destroyed, and if you proceed with your mission, other humans will find ways to stop you." Keleth's expression didn't change. "Commander Voss, you killed one ship at the cost of your entire defense force. My remaining vessels are more than sufficient to complete our objectives. The human species will be extinct within 72 hours. "Maybe," Voss acknowledged. "But you'll remember us. Every time you look at that expanding debris field where your flagship used to be, you'll remember that humans don't surrender. And someday, somehow, others like Ras Jeger will come for the rest of you." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in heavy silence. Around the room, the surviving crew members continued their duties with quiet efficiency, making final preparations for what they all knew would be their last battle. Some were composing final messages, others were simply ensuring that their duty stations were ready for the end. Zephyr looked up from her console, her voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, I'm detecting something strange. Long-range sensors are picking up multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge." Voss moved to her station, studying the sensor readings with growing amazement. The new contacts were human, dozens of ships emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. As he watched, more signatures appeared, until nearly 100 vessels filled the edge of the star system. "Impossible," Nira breathed, joining them at the sensor display. "Those are colony defense ships, merchant vessels, even some old military hulks. Where did they come from?" The answer came through the communications array as a familiar voice filled the command center. "Bastion Station, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the colony ship New Gibraltar. We received your final transmission and decided that if humanity is going to die, we should die together." More voices began to join the channel as ship after ship identified itself. The captain of a merchant convoy that had abandoned its cargo to answer the call. The commander of a colonial militia that had stripped every weapon from their settlements. Even civilian ships filled with families who had chosen to join the final battle rather than wait for extinction in their homes. "We may not have the firepower to win, came another voice over the comm, but Roz Jeger showed us how to hurt them. Every ship here has been rigged for ramming attacks. We're going to make them pay for every human life. Voss felt tears streaming down his face as he realized what he was seeing. Word of Bastion Station's last stand had somehow spread through the isolated human colonies, and they had chosen to abandon their defensive positions to join the final battle. It was magnificent, futile, and utterly human. All human vessels, this is Bastion Station, Voss announced over the command channel. We are honored by your presence, but you should know that we cannot win this battle. The collective fleet still outnumbers us significantly. Captain Vasquez's voice replied with quiet determination. Commander Voss, we didn't come here to win. We came here to make sure the galaxy remembers what happened when they tried to exterminate humanity. Roz Jeger lit a fire with his sacrifice, and we're here to make sure it burns bright enough to be seen across the stars. On the tactical display, the human fleet was spreading out into attack formation. Each ship was broadcasting its intention to ram the nearest collective vessel, turning the approaching battle into a massive suicide attack. The colonists and merchants had no chance against trained military vessels, but their determination was absolute. Admiral Kelitha's image reappeared on the main screen, his composed expression showing the first cracks of uncertainty. Commander Voss, order those vessels to withdraw immediately. They are non-combatants and will be treated as such if they leave the battle zone. I'm afraid I can't do that, Admiral, Voss replied with grim satisfaction. You see, you made a mistake when you threatened to exterminate our entire species. Now every human has nothing to lose, and we've learned from Roz Jeger that desperate people can accomplish impossible things. For the first time, doubt flickered across Kelitha's features. His tactical situation had just become far more complicated, with nearly 100 human vessels converging on his position. Even if each enemy ship only managed to damage one of his vessels before being destroyed, the losses would be significant. Final warning, Kelith announced. All human vessels have 60 seconds to withdraw, or my fleet will open fire. The response came not in words, but in action. Across the human fleet, ships began accelerating toward the collective formation, their improvised weapons charging and ramming courses locked in. At their head, Bastion Station's remaining fighters launched in a final sortie, led by Zephyr Blackthorn in her personal fighter. This is Blackthorn to all units, came her voice over the comm. Roz Jeger showed us the way. Now let's light up the dark. The final battle for humanity's survival was about to begin, and every ship carried the memory of a hunter who had dared to strike at the heart of impossible odds. The battle that followed would be remembered across the galaxy as the moment when a dying species chose to burn like a star rather than fade into darkness. Admiral Kelitha's 6 dreadnoughts opened fire simultaneously, their planet-killer weapons reaching across space to vaporize the first wave of human ships. But for every vessel destroyed, 2 more took its place, their crews singing ancient war songs as they drove their ships toward impossible targets. Keelan Voss watched from Bastion Station's command center as the New Gibraltar led a group of colonial freighters in a direct assault on the collective's lead dreadnought. Captain Vasquez's voice carried over the communication channels as her ship's hull began to glow from enemy fire, her crew working frantically to keep their improvised weapons online. Tell Earth, Vasquez called out as her ship's hull began to buckle, tell them we remembered how to fly. The New Gibraltar struck the dreadnought's forward shields in an explosion that lit up half the star system. The massive collective vessel staggered under the impact, its own weapons falling silent as damage control teams struggled with cascading system failures. Behind Vasquez, 3 more human ships followed her example, their ramming attacks finally breaking through the dreadnought's defenses to tear open its hull. Across the battle space, similar scenes played out as merchant captains and colonial militia commanders turned their vessels into guided missiles. The collective fleet's superior technology and training meant nothing against opponents who had already accepted death. Every human ship that died took at least 1 enemy vessel with it, and some managed to damage multiple targets before their destruction. Sir, reported Nira from her sensor station, her voice tight with amazement, we're actually winning. The collective fleet is down to 3 functional dreadnoughts and maybe 20 escort vessels. But Voss could see the cost of their victory. The human fleet had been reduced from nearly 100 ships to perhaps a dozen, and those survivors were all heavily damaged. Bastion Station itself was running on emergency power, its defensive weapons nearly exhausted. They had proven that humanity could not be easily exterminated, but the price had been devastating. Admiral Kelletha's face appeared on the main screen one final time, his composed mask finally cracking to reveal something approaching panic. Behind him, the bridge of his command ship showed signs of battle damage, sparks flying from overloaded systems. All collective vessels, Kelletha announced over his fleet's communication channel, prepare for immediate withdrawal. This operation is postponed pending fleet reorganization. Zephyr's voice crackled over the comm from her damaged fighter. Command, the collective fleet is breaking off. Repeat, enemy vessels are jumping to hyperspace. Voss watched in stunned silence as the surviving collective ships began to disappear, their faster-than-light drives carrying them away from the expanding debris field that marked humanity's Pyrrhic victory. In the space of a few hours, they had gone from facing total extinction to watching their would-be executioners flee in disorder. Commander, came a weak transmission from one of the surviving human ships. This is Captain Morris of the freighter Determination. Did we actually win? Voss considered the question carefully before responding. Hundreds of human ships and thousands of lives had been lost in the battle. Bastion Station was barely functional, and the colonies that had sent their defenders were now virtually defenseless. But SC Aurora was an expanding cloud of debris, its genocide fleet had fled, and word of the battle would spread to every corner of known space. Captain Morris, Voss replied slowly, I think we did something better than winning. We made sure the galaxy will remember us. Over the following hours, as rescue operations began and damage reports filtered in, the full scope of what had happened began to emerge. News of the Battle of Bastion spread through quantum communication networks faster than any ship could travel. The story of Jeger's sacrifice and humanity's impossible victory became legend almost overnight. On distant worlds, alien species who had supported humanity's isolation began to reconsider their positions. The collective's retreat had created a power vacuum in galactic politics, and many systems found themselves wondering if they had backed the wrong side. More importantly, human colonies throughout the quarantine zone began to organize their own defense fleets, inspired by Bastion's example. Dr. Nero worked tirelessly in the weeks that followed, analyzing the battle data and preparing reports for the scattered human settlements. Her findings were remarkable. The quantum torpedoes that had destroyed SC Aurora had been based on theoretical research that every major power had deemed impossible. Jeger's attack had proven that human innovation could overcome seemingly insurmountable technological disadvantages. The implications go far beyond just military applications, Nero explained to Voss as they stood in the rebuilt command center. Proved that our approach to physics and engineering is fundamentally different from the collectives. They build bigger and stronger, but we find ways to be cleverer. 3 months after the battle, a small ceremony was held in Bastion Station's Memorial Hall. The names of every human who had died in the War of Isolation were etched into crystalline walls that caught and reflected the light of distant stars. At the center of the memorial, a single name was highlighted in letters of pure gold, Jeger, the hunter who had dared to strike at the heart of the galaxy's most powerful fleet. Voss stood before the memorial with a handful of survivors who remained on the station. Most of the human fleet had dispersed to carry word of the victory to their home colonies, but a few had chosen to stay and help rebuild. Among them was Zephyr Blackthorn, now serving as Bastion's new chief pilot, and Dr. Nero Castellan, whose research had made the impossible victory achievable. He would have been amazed, Zephyr said quietly, looking up at Ra's name on the memorial wall. All those times he called his missions glorious impossibilities, I don't think he ever believed one would actually change everything. But even as they mourned their dead and celebrated their victory, troubling reports continued to filter in from the galaxy's edge. The collective had not abandoned their plans for human extinction, they had simply postponed them while they rebuilt their fleet. Admiral Kelletha's surviving ships had returned to their home systems with tales of human desperation and innovation that had shaken the collective's confidence but not their resolve. They'll be back, Voss said, studying the latest intelligence reports from deep space. Bigger fleets, better shields, more careful tactics. They've learned from our victory just as much as we have. Mira nodded grimly. But so have our people. Every human colony is building ships now, training pilots, preparing for the next battle. Roz showed them that the impossible is just another word for difficult. As if summoned by their conversation, the station's long-range communications array began receiving a transmission from Earth itself. The signal had taken months to reach them, traveling through the collective's quarantine barriers by routes known only to the most desperate smugglers. The image that appeared was that of an elderly woman in the uniform of Earth's planetary defense force. Her face was weathered by age and responsibility, but her eyes held the same fire that had driven Roz Jeger into the heart of SC Aurora. Bastion Station, this is Admiral Saracen, speaking for the United Earth Government. We have received your battle reports and wish to express our deepest gratitude for your sacrifice. The war of isolation is not over, but thanks to your actions, it is no longer a war for survival, it has become a war for freedom. The Admiral's image flickered as the transmission struggled through the interference of hostile space. Roz Jeger's name is being spoken in every human settlement from the inner colonies to the rim territories. Children who have never seen Earth are learning his story, and they are not learning to hide from the dark. They are learning to light fires that can be seen across the galaxy. Voss felt tears streaming down his face as he realized the full scope of what they had accomplished. Roz's sacrifice had been intended to save Bastion Station, but it had done something far greater. It had given humanity hope when all seemed lost, and shown them that even the mightiest enemies could be defeated by those brave enough to pay the price. The collective wanted to demonstrate that resistance was futile, Admiral Chen continued. Instead, Roz Jeger demonstrated that surrender is impossible. Every human ship that launches now carries his memory, and every captain who faces impossible odds remembers that the hunter found a way to strike at the heart of the enemy. As the transmission faded, Voss looked around at his fellow survivors. They were few in number, scarred by battle, and surrounded by the vast emptiness of hostile space. But in their eyes, he saw something that had been missing since the War of Isolation began: hope for the future and confidence that humanity would not simply survive, but ultimately prevail. Outside the station's viewports, the debris field that had once been SC Aurora continued to expand, carrying with it the echo of Roz Jeger's final strike. That echo would travel across the galaxy, reaching every world and species that had watched humanity's attempted extinction. And in that echo, they would hear a warning that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Humanity had learned to hunt among the void, and the galaxy would never be the same. Roz Jeger was gone, but the fire he had lit would burn for generations, carried by every human who looked up at the stars and refused to accept that any dream was impossible to achieve.